In the heart of Africa's restless winds of change, whispers began to spread across the continent and beyond the Atlantic waters. From the crowded streets of Accra to the markets of Dakar, and even into the neighborhoods of Philadelphia in the United States, one name kept echoing: Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain who rose from soldier to leader in Burkina Faso. Dr. Umar Johnson, a fiery Pan-African voice known for challenging the remnants of colonial systems, was thousands of miles away, but his eyes were fixed firmly on the African continent. In his lectures and speeches, he often reminded the African diaspora that true liberation could never come without sovereign leadership in Africa itself. So when news of Traoré's rise reached him, the expulsion of foreign troops, the calls for unity, the vision of self-reliance, Dr. Umar leaned forward in his chair, sensing that history might be turning. "Brothers and sisters," he declared to a packed hall during one of his lectures in Atlanta, his voice thundering like a drumbeat. "Do you see what is happening in Burkina Faso? Do you see the spirit of Thomas Sankara rising again? This young man, Captain Traoré, is not just fighting for his people. He is fighting for all Africans at home and abroad." The crowd erupted, many of them young men and women who had never before heard the name Traoré but felt the weight of Umar's conviction. To them, Ibrahim Traoré became more than a president, he became a symbol. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, Traoré was grappling with a different reality. His country was bleeding from insurgencies, his soldiers stretched thin, his people hungry for security and dignity. Yet, even as the nights grew longer and the challenges deepened, messages of solidarity began to arrive. From Africa, the Caribbean, and Black communities across America. One letter, handwritten and carried by a delegation of Pan-African activists, was placed on Traoré's desk. It bore Dr. Umar Johnson's name at the bottom. "To the captain of Burkina Faso, the eyes of the African world are upon you. You carry not only the burden of your nation but the hopes of a people scattered across continents. Stand firm, for your fight is our fight." Traoré read it silently, the weight heavy on his shoulders. Outside his office, young volunteers trained with wooden rifles, chanting songs of freedom. Inside, the captain folded the letter neatly and placed it in his breast pocket. Far away, in Jamaica, murals of Traoré's face began to appear on walls beside Marcus Garvey's. In London, African students carried banners with his image, chanting slogans of unity. And in Harlem, New York, Dr. Umar organized a rally, raising his fist high and proclaiming, "This is not about one man. It is about the rebirth of African leadership." And so the story of Ibrahim Traoré and Dr. Umar Johnson began to intertwine, not through official endorsements or government deals, but through a shared vision of sovereignty, dignity, and resistance against the old chains of imperialism. Yet, even as this Pan-African wave grew, dark clouds gathered over the Sahel. Attacks in rural Burkina Faso intensified, critics warned of propaganda, and powerful nations watched closely, plotting their next move. The question lingered in every marketplace, every classroom, and every diaspora community gathering. Could this young captain truly withstand the storm, or would he, like many before him, be swallowed by the weight of history? The sun was setting over Ouagadougou, casting a golden glow over the dusty streets. Ibrahim Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, his military jacket slightly open, his beret tucked under his arm. Below, hundreds of young Burkinabe gathered, chanting his name, waving homemade flags stitched with red, green, and gold. Their voices rose like a single heartbeat, echoing across the capital. "Traoré, Traoré, our captain, our hope." But inside, his mind was heavy. Reports lay scattered across his desk. Villages attacked in the north, displaced families in the thousands, and whispers of foreign spies working to undermine his government. He knew the world was watching, not with love, but with suspicion. And yet, there was something else, something stirring. He could feel it in the letters arriving daily, in the solidarity videos sent from London, New York, Lagos, and Kingston. Across oceans, Africans and their descendants were beginning to see Burkina Faso not as a small, landlocked nation but as a symbol of resistance. In Philadelphia, Dr. Umar Johnson prepared for another speech. His voice was hoarse from weeks of traveling city to city, but his fire had not dimmed. At an African-American cultural center, he stood before a mural of Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, his voice booming through the hall. "My brothers and sisters of the diaspora," he began. "The torch of Pan-Africanism is alive again. A young captain, barely older than many of you, has dared to stand against imperial powers. Captain Traoré is not just the leader of Burkina Faso. He is a spark for the entire African world. But hear me well. The spark needs fuel, and that fuel is you." The crowd leaned in. Young men and women, some with raised fists, some recording on their phones, felt the urgency in his words. Dr. Umar pointed to a map of Africa behind him. "They fear him not because of what he has already done, but because of what he could inspire. Imagine a continent where leaders answer only to their people, not to Paris, not to Washington, not to London. That is what Captain Traoré represents. And if he succeeds, Africa succeeds. And if Africa succeeds, the black world succeeds." Back in Ouagadougou, the captain received word of this speech. His advisors told him of the growing support abroad, how African Americans and Caribbeans were beginning to chant his name at rallies. Traoré was a man of few words, but he murmured quietly to his close aide, "Tell them, we are not just fighting for Burkina Faso. We are fighting for Africa." The aide nodded, and soon the word spread, carried by social media, printed on posters, whispered in marketplaces. In Nairobi, students at a Pan-African conference began to study Traoré's speeches. In Accra, market women sang songs comparing him to Sankara. In the diaspora, Dr. Umar used every microphone he could find to amplify the message. The future of African leadership was being born in the Sahel, but shadows stretched long. France, angered by its loss of influence, tightened economic pressures. International media painted Traoré as reckless, a dangerous populist. Armed groups intensified their attacks, hoping to break the will of the people. Still, the chants grew louder. In the refugee camps, children sang his name. In the universities, debates raged about the meaning of sovereignty. In the diaspora, young people began wearing shirts with his image beside Sankara's, Nkrumah's, and Lumumba's. The struggle was only beginning, and both Traoré and Dr. Umar knew it. But for the first time in decades, the dream of a united African spirit, at home and abroad, felt within reach. Night fell over Ouagadougou, but the presidential compound was still lit with activity. Inside a dimly lit war room, Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat at a long table surrounded by maps, intelligence reports, and commanders in dusty uniforms. His eyes scanned a red-marked map of the northern provinces, areas crawling with insurgents. One of his commanders, Colonel Ouagadougou, slammed a fist on the table. "Captain, we cannot hold these villages with the few men we have. The terrorists are better armed. Someone is supplying them, and we all know who." The room grew tense. They all knew the whispers, that shadowy foreign interests were fueling chaos to break Traoré's government. Traoré leaned forward, his voice calm but heavy with resolve. "Comrades, Burkina Faso is not alone. Our brothers in Mali and Niger are standing with us. We are no longer fighting village by village. We are fighting for the soul of Africa, and we will not lose." The room erupted in applause, fists raised in solidarity. Yet, beneath the determination, everyone felt the weight. The battles ahead would be merciless. Thousands of miles away, in New York City, a gathering of young black activists filled a crowded community center in Harlem. Posters of Traoré lined the walls, alongside Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, and Thomas Sankara. At the center of the room stood Dr. Umar Johnson, his voice carrying over the clapping and stomping of the audience. "Family, listen to me. They want to break Captain Traoré because he is a mirror reflecting what Africa could be if it shook off the chains of colonialism. And when Africa rises, the African in America rises, the African in the Caribbean rises, the African in Europe rises." A young woman in the audience shouted, "So what can we do from here, Dr. Umar?" He pointed his finger toward her, his eyes blazing. "Support his struggle. Spread his story. Pressure your leaders to respect African sovereignty. And never forget, what they fear is not one man with an army. What they fear is one man with an idea whose time has come. The room thundered with applause, and chants of Africa must unite filled the air. Back in Ouagadougou, word of these rallies reached Traoré through his advisors. Late at night, after meetings with ministers, he would watch clips on a small television. Africans in Jamaica dancing to songs with his name in the lyrics, African Americans marching in solidarity, students in Ghana painting murals of him beside Sankara. He said little, but those close to him noticed the fire in his eyes burn brighter. "Captain," one advisor said softly, "the world is beginning to see you as more than a leader of Burkina Faso." Traoré adjusted his beret and replied, "I am just a soldier. But if the people believe, then maybe, just maybe, Africa will march again." But not everyone was cheering. In Paris, closed-door meetings were taking place. French officials studied reports of Traoré's rising popularity, worried about the growing alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Across the Atlantic, in Washington, analysts debated how long this Pan-African wave would last before internal pressures tore it apart. Still, in the streets of Ouagadougou, the people kept chanting, drummers beat rhythms deep into the night, and children waved flags, believing that their young captain carried the weight of a continent on his shoulders. The story was no longer just about Burkina Faso. It was about a battle between the old world and the new, between dependency and freedom, between silence and the roar of a people demanding to stand tall. And across the ocean, Dr. Umar prepared for yet another rally, this time in London, where African and Caribbean communities waited eagerly to hear him tie their destinies to that of a young captain in West Africa. The movement was growing. The struggle was intensifying. The story was far from over. Weeks passed, and the Sahel sun burned hotter over Burkina Faso. The battles in the north raged on, but so did the spirit of the people. Ibrahim Traoré traveled from village to village, not in the comfort of armored cars, but on dusty roads, sitting among farmers, eating from their calabashes, listening to their fears and hopes. Wherever he went, children ran beside his convoy, chanting his name. One evening in Kaya, a small town scarred by conflict, Traoré stood before thousands gathered in the marketplace. His voice carried over the crowd. "My people, we have suffered enough. No foreign soldier will save us. No outsider will feed our children. It is our sweat, our hands, and our courage that will rebuild this land. And together we will rise. Not as slaves, but as free Africans." The crowd roared, and women ululated into the night sky. For the first time in decades, hope felt real. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Dr. Umar Johnson's movement had grown. From Harlem to London, from Kingston to Lagos, Africans and the diaspora began speaking of a new chapter. One that did not begin in Paris or Washington, but in the dusty streets of Ouagadougou. At a massive rally in Accra, Ghana, Dr. Umar stood before a sea of young Africans waving Burkinabe flags. His voice thundered. "Look at Captain Traoré. He is proof that African leadership belongs to Africans, not to Europe, not to America. If he can resist, then so can you. If Burkina Faso can stand, then Africa can rise. The chains are breaking. The chants of Africa must unite," shook the grounds. But the struggle was not without sacrifice. Armed groups intensified attacks and foreign pressure mounted. Yet, the alliance between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger grew stronger. Together, they announced the Confederation of Sahel States, vowing to defend one another against threats, to share resources, and to chart a new independent path. International cameras captured the moment. Standing side by side with his counterparts, Traoré raised his fist and declared, "From this day forward, Africa will no longer be a playground for outsiders. We will build our own destiny. We will guard our own future. And we will never kneel again." The images spread like wildfire. In Harlem, murals of Traoré now stood beside Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah. In Jamaica, reggae artists sang his name in their lyrics. In London, students painted his face on university walls. And in Philadelphia, Dr. Umar told his followers, "The prophecy is clear. Africa has entered a new dawn. Remember this day, my brothers and sisters, because the tide has turned." Months later, Traoré returned to the palace in Ouagadougou. The night was quiet, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He stood alone on the balcony where his journey had begun. He thought of Sankara, of all the martyrs of Africa's freedom struggles, and of the generations yet unborn who would inherit what they were building. He whispered softly into the night air, "We are free people, and we will remain free." At that moment, fireworks lit up the sky as Burkina across the country celebrated Independence Day with a new meaning. It was no longer just a date on the calendar, it was a living promise. And across oceans, in the diaspora, millions echoed the same truth. Africa's future had begun.